Hi everyone, today we are taking a look at the project file for my latest video entitled 7. As usual, let's start with the drums. So for this track I'm using a combination of GGD's P4 library along with the original Matt Halpern kit V1. I'm using the Pearl Sensiton snare, which rings in B, which is the key of the song. So just matching that using the pitch control. And I'm layering the P3 main snare, which adds a bit of crack and rings a minor third above. As for the kick drum, I'm using the Pearl Masters Birch along with the 16 inches deep P3 kick. Let's move on to processing. Let's start with an AB with and without the processing for the drums. So for this track I'm processing a bit more than usual, just to get that extra bit of punch and definition in the shells. Let's start with the kick drum. So the first plugin I use on all the drum channels is going to be this API-style channel strip from Plugin Alliance. For the kick drum I'm adding a bit of saturation in the preamp, adding a touch of top end with a shelf, cutting some of the excess click around 5k. Some of the boxiness in the mids, and I'm also shifting the low end punch a bit lower by cutting some of the low mids. I'm then feeding the signal into R bass just to add some weight in the subs. Then we go into smash and grab. And this is a bit unusual for me, but I'm using some saturation after the compressor. Next is the snare. As with the kick drum, I'm adding some saturation in the preamp, adding just a touch of sizzle. I'm getting rid of some boxiness. I'm then using FabFilter's Pro Q3 to do some surgical moves, removing a nasty resonant peak here, controlling the high-mid peak, and I'm also getting rid of the excess air in the snare. And then good old smash and grab in grab mode, snare type. Now the overheads, starting with the channel strip. So I'm adding a fair bit of saturation, some top end with the shelf. I'm getting rid of some of the excess sizzle in the 5k range. I'm also getting rid of some of the honkiness of the snare and some of the boxiness in the low mids. I'm then using this stock Logic EQ to further carve out some of the critical regions and also to remove the excess air. And then the magic box that is Soothe 2. And I'm then crushing the overheads in grab mode and then bringing that in very subtly. Moving on to toms. So I'm doing very similar things both for rack and floor toms, just shifting the frequency nodes. So first I'm using some saturation in the preamp, adding some attack in the high end and high mids. I'm getting rid of a lot of mids. And I'm then using smash and grab just to tighten the sound and add some punch. Finally, the room mics. So for the room mics, I'm using the high pass filter. I'm using a lot of saturation just to shave off the transients in the sound. I'm adding some top end, controlling the sizzle and click, getting rid of some of the boxy mids, and I'm controlling the low and low mids using a shelf. And then you guessed it, smash and grab, but in smash mode. Then I route all my drum channels to an aux, which is going to be a very aggressive compressor. I'm using Logic's stock FET compressor to crush the shells. And this is going to add some body and character to the shells. I'm then sending snare, toms, some of the overhead and room mics to Reverb channel. I'm using Valhalla Room, cut, which I cut most of the low end and low mids off. And I'm also compressing the reverb using this Distort S compressor. Now I'm summing up all these channels into a drum bus, on which I'm applying some further saturation. I'm using this diode compressor, which is modeled after a Neve compressor, just to glue the whole drum kit together. And finally, for the drums, I'm using a clipper just to shave off the peaks while retaining the sense of punch. Now that the drums are in place, let's see what we have in this session. So first is a topper. Yeah, so for this track I just banged on some pots and pans, my mic stand and some wood blocks, and added some claps, and then mashed everything together using a very aggressive compressor. Then bass. So yeah, there's no processing on this track. I'm using the EQ compressor and limiter within my GT1000 floorboard unit to do all the processing. Then we have the main rhythm guitar tracks. So as you can see, there's not much going on. I'm just using some gate to get this very staccato sound. On the guitar bus itself, I'm using an EQ just to dip these honky mids. I'm then using C4 both as a low-end shelf EQ and as a multiband compressor just to control the low end, since I like to track with a lot of low end, but I still need to control that low end in the mix. And finally I'm adding just some stereo width. Just very minimal processing on the guitars. Let's see what we have next. So there's a Mellotron, which is just the Logic stock one. I'm filtering out the low mids and high mids just to make space for the other instruments, making it pump so there's space on the downbeats, and then using wiith compressor to add some tape wow and width. And then we have these really over-the-top orchestral hits, which are from the CMI unit. So reverb, OTT, and very aggressive compressor. Then moving on to the star of the show, the brass section. So I'm using mostly stock Logic horns. This one's going to be the staccato ensemble, which is paired with the glorious sounding Jaeger library by Audio Imperia. Then we have another ensemble patch. Then two saxophones spread an octave apart, just doing all the wacky articulations. So these guys are the star of the show, so they get some TLC. First is a short reverb, then some very aggressive parallel saturation, going into a tape saturation, just to control the air. There's also a trumpet layer on the high saxophone part. And last, in this brass section, I'm using the Trumphal patch from the CMI just to add some density. On the brass bus, I'm using Soothe 2 to control the harsh resonant peaks. Then some subtle EQ and saturation using the NL's channel. Some mid-side EQ just to spread the brass section more to the sides. I'm using OTT just to add impact to the sound. Then some tape saturation to shave off the excess attack and to control the high end. And finally some reverb. So as we move on to the middle section of the track, there are two barely processed guitar tracks. Then some clean guitars, from which I remove a good chunk of the low mids. I'm using refinement just to control the harshness in the high mids and to add some air. And I'm using Valhalla Shimmer just to add the pitched up reverb. And we have no post-processing on the lead guitar. A riser, which is just an octave played on the guitar and then reversed in Logic. which leads us to the last section of the track, which features a guitar pad, which sounds very much like what you can hear on the Violent Sleep of Reason album by Meshuggah. This is just a simple 3-part harmony cluster. As for the processing, I'm filtering out a lot of the low end and some of the high mids, using Soothe 2 just to get rid of the resonant peaks, a free chorus, refinement, again, just to control the harshness and to add some air, a light reverb, and finally track spacer, which makes sure that the guitar pad ducks in volume in the mid channel when the bass is playing. And finally, let's take a quick look at the master bus. I'm using a compressor with the nollie trick, which is to duck the whole mix when the snare hits. I'm timing my release times according to the BPM of the song. I'm using this BX Hybrid V2 plugin to do a master bus lift, since I felt like all the tracks needed some more high end and low end. Again, I'm using this Kramer tape saturation just to add some depth and messiness to the sound. Then one of my non-secret tricks, which is to use a mid-side EQ, just adding 1 dB around 800 Hz on the sides and then saturating the sides a little bit. And this will beef up the sides from your mix in a very natural way. And then I felt like the whole mix was lacking some aggression in the mids and high mids to saturate everything above 260 using the warm tape mode. And the volume boost is achieved using a hard clipper. That's it for this track. I'm going to be doing a quick Q&A on Instagram, so feel free to ask me if you have any further questions. And I'm slowly becoming a YouTuber, which means I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch my videos, and see you next time. Bye!